so it's going to be on this computer. So good afternoon. This is the talk Inverting the Pyramid. As I just mentioned there, this is in a sense in response to the talk that I gave last week. And those who came to the talk last week or have seen the talk I gave last week, the key principle there was looking at how carbohydrate in the diet and excess carbohydrate, be that refined or processed in particular, and often in the form of sugar, actually then sets up a metabolic chain of events that then lead to things such as hypertension, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and is even now linked to cancer and dementia. And so I was looking at how there's a metabolic explanation for that, how the history we got into this dietary situation where now we are encouraged to eat a lot of carbohydrate. I looked at the history of that and why there's potentially a mismatch there. And today I'm going to address two of the very common questions that follow on from that. If we have a diet where I'm telling you to cut down on your carbohydrate, one of the biggest sources, or two of the big sources of carbohydrate are fruit and vegetables. And of course, we have the line we're supposed to eat 5 portions of fruit and vegetable a day. So it's a common question when I've sort of laid the groundwork and said, right, well, actually, we need to cut down the starchy vegetables. We need to cut down on the fruit. People then say, what about the 5 a day? So one of my questions I'm dealing with today is, what about the 5 a day? And if you take carbohydrate out of your diet, imagine you've got a plate to fill and you've cut down the carbohydrate on your diet. Filling the rest of the plate by inference means you're going to put more fat on your plate. And we've grown up in the paradigm that fat clogs your arteries. And of course, therefore, a big concern will be if I start saying to people, increase your fat consumption, people are going to say, well, hang on, is that not going to clog my arteries? So the two big questions I'm going to address today are the 5 a day, what happens if you cut down your fruit and veg? And if you increase your fat, what is the risk with regard to clogging your arteries? So that's the agenda for today. I hope you're all in the right room. If you wanted needlecraft, then you've obviously clicked on the wrong Zoom link. So let me get the share screen going here, because I do have slides to help with my presentation. Okay, so I'll just wait for that to set itself going. So there we are. I'll put references on this week as well. I think most of you I know directly, so you know how to contact me, but there are a few people who've seen the video who I don't know, and so I've put my contact details on the front page there, and I hope that helps for those who wish to contact me. So I'm going to start my talk today with sort of like a little, it's not so much a recap, but coming to the same starting point from a slightly different direction. And it's a start point I've used. I've given some live talks about nutrition. I gave them last year and at the end of the year before. And I'm going to use one of the starts I used for one of those talks. I'm going to introduce you to someone called Pauline the Paleo. So Pauline is a fictitious, obviously, character from that sort of era, 16,000 BC, a time when we were very definitely hunter-gatherers. And I found this little cartoon sketch here. I thought you were the gatherer, but no, he was standing on the bit I wanted to gather. So I want to look at a hunter-gatherer's perspective on modern nutrition. And that's really quite relevant because the genetic makeup of the hunter-gatherer from 16,000 BC is not that different from the genetic makeup we have now. There are differences in sort of gut biome and epigenetics, as we call it, but essentially Pauline the Paleo and us are very similar in so many ways. So I want you to imagine that Pauline the Paleo had access to some sort of time machine that allowed her to transport from 16,000 BC to present day, 2020. And I want you to see from her eyes what she would see in terms of human health, okay? And what she would see very clearly right from the outset is there are some big improvements in our health compared to her period 16,000 years ago. In that time, we've got on top of infectious diseases, we're on top of emergency care, childhood mortality is transformed, and we have great medications and protocols for dealing with pain management. So the things which in her day, in 16,000 BC, would be very relevant to her daily existence, infectious diseases, injury from accidents, the death of children, and the death of mothers giving birth during childbirth, and pain management, hugely transformed. So do you see those as all as huge benefits, huge progress, signs of progress in our modern healthcare systems? But it wouldn't be all one way, because she would look at us and she would see some other things. She'd notice that we are fatter. Now, I talked about this last week, and it was my starting point last week about the obesity epidemic, the obesity pandemic in the population, and she would certainly notice that we are fatter. By and large, we're shorter. Very interestingly, from skeletal records we have from her period, we know that Paleolithic people were generally really quite tall. Now, in the last 50 to 100 years, as a population, we've begun to recover that height and probably now have a similar height. But actually, from about 10,000 years ago to present day, give or take a century, we were actually shorter than Pauline and her contemporaries. What she'd also noticed is that we suffer from things that she would not recognize. Chronic non-infectious diseases, diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure. She just would have no concept of those diseases. They would just not be known. Okay, they wouldn't have those names there, of course, but she just wouldn't recognize the symptoms or the conditions in any form. And what was interesting is that once Paleolithic people got through childhood, actually the elders, they lived shorter than we do, and we've probably made a difference of about 9 or 10 years over that time. But generally speaking, they didn't live that much shorter life than modern day people. And those differences are mostly accountable to the way we manage infectious disease and accident and injury. So she would notice there's things which are somewhat different. And the big difference would be that in her period, there probably wouldn't be failing health in old age. Whereas for us, often old age is assumed to bring with it failing health issues. So for Pauline, it wouldn't quite be a clear-cut thing that health in our period is better than in hers. Yes, we have the benefits of infectious disease control and pain management and so on. And one of the things that she would also know that is hugely different, or see that is hugely different, is our food. She would probably look at our food and be really quite nonplussed about what's going on. First of all, a lot of the food that we eat, she would not recognize as food. If she walked into a supermarket, for most of the shelves and most of the items on the shelves, she would just have no idea that those things are meant to be food. It's hugely processed and she wouldn't recognize it. And even the foods that she might recognize would be absolutely unrecognizable in terms of their nutrient quality and their taste. Very different beasts, very different things, even in the food groups that she might recognize. And when it comes to meat, for example, she will notice that we've gone completely for the different parts of the animal. In Paleolithic times, from the archaeological record, we seem to have the evidence that Paleolithic people valued the organ meat of the animals that they slaughtered. And when they did eat the skeletal muscle, the bits of the meat that we tend to eat now, they would eat the very fatty cuts. We now seem to have gone for the lean, fatless or relatively fatless cuts of meat, and she'd be really nonplussed by that, wondering what on earth has gone on. Another thing she'd notice is that we have food access 24/7. She wouldn't have done. She would have had episodic eating, in the sense there would have been, if there'd been hunting, there would have been a kill, there would have been an animal slaughtered from the kill, there would have been a feast of food at that point, and then you'd go relatively quite a long period before that is repeated again. And the gathering part of the Paleolithic person lifestyle was supplementing those periods between hunting. So the gathering food was the survival food, but the results of the hunting was the thriving food. So she wouldn't recognize our ability to graze all the time. So she would not notice some big difference. And you would wonder, or you begin to wonder on balance, whether actually she'd be happier in Paleolithic times with all of those things that have sort of seemingly gone wrong in our time period with regard chronic health and the way we eat. And it's not just the reserve of Pauline the Paleo. Here's Vic the Victorian. And I'm going to obviously move the time clock very much to a more recent time. 1850 is the time I'm pitching there. And actually, in the middle to late Victorian period, there was a peak point in human health, rather remarkably. And again, Victor would not notice many of the things, or would not recognize many of the things that we have in our modern society with regard health and disease. All of these conditions would be unrecognizable to him. Heart disease, obesity would be rare. Type 2 diabetes wasn't yet diagnosed as a condition. It wasn't that it was rampant but undiagnosed, it just wasn't a condition. Cancers were rare, autoimmune conditions were extremely rare, and childhood behavioral disorders were rare too. Obviously, childhood mortality was still a relatively big thing at that point, or that was beginning to be changed at that time. But again, Vic the Victorian would see some big differences in the health in his contemporaries versus the health of modern day people. And so we've got this what I call elephant in the room, that we are a population that, despite all the advances in health technology, let's call it, we are increasingly unhealthy population. There is very definitely an elephant in the room. And of course, and it's the relevance I made at the end point of the talk last week, there's not only an elephant in the room, but we have a virus in the room as well, which is really highlighting, it's another way of highlighting the same comparison, the same issues, that the virus is exploiting the metabolic health of the population, and the metabolic health of the population by many measures is deteriorating, and deteriorating relative to Victorian times, and deteriorated in many ways relative to much older times as well. So that was my sort of alternative start point, if you like. And the nutshell, the sort of bringing that together and bringing it to a point of moderate conclusion, is the problem is what we eat. The metabolic health issue fundamentally in many ways boils down to what we eat. And following on from that, the medications that we then take to mop up the fact we eat what we do. So a lot of medications we take, it can be argued, and is consistently being argued now, are the result of the fact we have poor diets. So that is the problem. The solution, though, is tackling what we eat. So the problem and the solution are all vested with our diets. And so that is my starting point here. The problem and yet the solution are all vested with what we eat. And here's a talk from a guy called Michael Pollan. He's written many books. One of his that I've read is In Defense of Food. And in this short clip where he's being interviewed with regard to another book, he talks about food-like substances. He's questioned on this idea, what food should we eat? And he then sort of throws that back, as you'll see in this clip. He throws that back by saying, the problem is nowadays we eat a lot of edible food-like substances rather than real food. So let me play the clip and then...
The first section of Food Rules is called Eat Food. Do we eat things that aren't food?
Yeah, that's the hard part. You know, it sounds very simple. What should you eat? You should eat food. But there's a lot of what I call edible food-like substances now in the supermarket masquerading as food. And so the whole first section of this book is a series of rules or algorithms that will help you distinguish the real food from this other stuff. And this other stuff is really the novel creations of food science over the last 50 or 75 years. And
so Rule 2 says don't eat anything that our grandmothers or great-grandmothers wouldn't recognize as food. That suggests that Americans ate better during the Great Depression.
Well, they often did, and in fact, you know, rates of if you look at rates of chronic disease, they were better then. They were much better during the war too.
But hasn't life expectancy gone up?
Yeah, life expectancy has gone up since the beginning of the century, but most of the gain, it's gone up about 17 years, and 11 of those years are attributed to a surviving childhood, essentially, improved rates of infant mortality, and childhood health and inoculations and things like that. And then we've added 6 years at the end of life through our heroic interventions on heart disease and cancer and things like that. It is not a superior diet that accounts for our longer lives. To the contrary, the American diet is responsible for about 3/4 of the healthcare spending. I mean, we spend it on chronic diseases linked to diet. That is, the healthcare crisis is a euphemism for the catastrophe of the American diet.
So there we go. The healthcare crisis is a euphemism for the catastrophe of the modern diet. I couldn't have said it better, and I'm glad he said it. Okay, so let's move on. Let's get on to today's talk. So I'm going to talk, and I gave you the brief introduction way before I start. I'm going to start with talking about food pyramids. It was a concept that was introduced in the early 1980s and in various forms still continues. You see it on websites, NHS websites, Eating Well websites. I'm going to talk about food pyramids and the food plate concept. And then I'm going to tackle those two prime issues that I mentioned earlier. If you follow the advice that I'm advocating via these talks of cutting down your sugar intake, cutting down your starch intake, that will impact your consumption of fruit and veg. And so what happens to your 5 a day? And to fill your plate, you're going to have to consume more fat. So that's going to raise the issue, well, is all that fat going to clog your arteries? And then in whatever time I have left, I'll again look at some ideas, again in response to some of the questions that I had at the end of the last session, looking at how we do indeed fill our plate in the context of those ideas. So let me start with the idea of food pyramids. And if you Google food pyramid, this is the front screen I got, this is the first page I got, all the different visual representations of food pyramids that are out there. And let me start with one particular one, which I quite liked, not liked in terms of content, but liked in terms of the detail it provides. And the basic concept of the food pyramid, hopefully you can see my cursor here, the base of the pyramid, or rather the wider the slices in my pyramid, indicates the more of these things there should be in your diet. So the base of this pyramid, we've got grains, we've got pasta, we've got cereal, we've got bread. We've got some things I'm not quite sure what they are. We've got, looks like a Danish pastry. We've got some potatoes. We've got something in a bowl. I'm not quite sure what that is, but we've got these grains and cereals as the big part of the pyramid. To me, they are carbohydrates. So we've got carbohydrate, the biggest part of this pyramid. We're coming up, we've got the fruit and vegetables, the next slice, a little bit of the smaller slice. It's a mixed bag because we've got fruit, they've got lots of sugars and starches and carbohydrates, and then we've got vegetables with a lot of starches in them. We've also got some fibrous vegetables as well. The middling sort of slice is our fish and natural oils. We've got some dairy in there as well. We've got some cheese and some eggs. We've got then a reducing slice of meat. Notice I've got processed meats mixed in there as well as just what I call traditional cuts of meat. And at the very apex of the pyramid, therefore in small measures, we've got the fats and the oils. So that is one of the traditional. I didn't make a note of which website that was from, but that's typical in its structure. And what I like about this one, it gives the details around the sides of the pyramid as well. And we've got some crazy lady doing lots of yoga positions as well, as if that's going to help with the pyramid. But we'll come to that. A modern spin, if you like, and pun intended, of the pyramid concept is the mite plate concept. The mite plate concept, I think, is an American concept. It muddies the waters for me because what's that telling me? What does that dairy circle outside the plate tell me? I just find this very confusing. And what I find also very frustrating is we don't call a spade a spade. We call grains grains. We call vegetables vegetables. We call fruit fruits. We don't call protein meat and dairy. I suppose dairy would sit in the dairy there, but we don't call protein meat. I know there are other sources of protein. You get some protein from nuts, you can get some protein from pulses, but the big source of protein in our diet should be meat and fish, and yet the my plate concept doesn't have the strength to call them that. So I just find that's another very interesting spin, and you'll see later on that I sort of drawn this element to do with the food industry. So let's talk at high-level summary of what I talked about last week in Survival of the Fattest, and my talk Survival of the Fattest. I started the conversation by looking at the obesity curve in the human population up to recent figures, 2019 figures from 1800, and you see there's two inflection points in the curve, and I talked about the possible reasons: grain manufacture, grain processing in the mid-Victorian period, but this critical one here in the 1980s was to do with the introduction of the Dietary Food Guidelines of America. And my vertical axis here, I talked about obesity, but it could equally have been hypertension, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, or dementia. So the curves are similar in nature, although the numbers on the curves are different, but the shapes of the curves are very similar for each one of those conditions, and so I could equally have chosen any one of those as my vertical axis on this graph. And the concept that I move on, or if you like, developed during the talk, was that essentially starch, sugars, and these refined synthetic oils and fats all have a contribution to our poor metabolic health, leading into something called insulin resistance. And this was the real nub of all of those metabolic conditions that could have been on the vertical axis of those graphs. And this was the core. And it was this persistent eating of sugar, processed refined starches, as well to an extent or natural starches as well, if you're susceptible to them, and these refined synthetic oils and fats that are not found in nature. And yet all of these things were encouraged. So sugar maybe less so with the food pyramid and the dietary guidelines, but certainly the starches and the synthetic oils were very much encouraged by the dietary guidelines that were introduced in 1980. And yet we now know from metabolic studies that these are all contributory factors to this thing called insulin resistance. Well, the dietary guidelines are really what have shaped the pyramid. And if we look at the pyramid, I'll sort of draw some lines around the various sections. That's our big starch group. We've got lots of sugars and starches in the vegetables and the fruit. They're mentioned there in the number of servings we should have. We've got there the bread, cereal, rice, and pasta. They're all part of the grains and cereal setting. And what's interesting about the food pyramid is that there's no distinction in this food pyramid structure between natural fats and created refined synthetic fats. So it's all a little bit muddled. It's very consistent with the dietary guidelines, but in terms of metabolic health, it actually is really the other way around. And what we really need to do is turn the pyramid the other way up. So the things that are at the top of the pyramid should really be at the bottom, and the things at the bottom should really be at the top of the pyramid. And so if I now root out a low carbohydrate food pyramid, here's one such pyramid, not quite so graphically appealing as the previous one, but it conveys the right information. And it's exactly as I suggested there. We've got the fats at the base of the pyramid. They're the things we eat most of all, but they're all natural intrinsic fats. I think that's a piece of fatty meat, I think, but all these, all olive oil, coconut, butter, avocado, they're all the things that are natural fats. Then above that, we have our meat. We've still got a bit of processed meat. I don't mind a little bit of processed meat, but essentially we've got the eggs, we've got the natural oily fish, we've got some natural cuts of meat in there. We've got the non-starchy vegetables, we've got dairy, and we've got some nuts, and then sparingly at the top, we've got a few of the berries to provide a little bit of natural sugar and the things that go with the fruit. So that's the typical low carb pyramid, and it's very definitely an inversion of the previous pyramid. So when I talk about inverting the pyramid, that's really what I'm talking about. It's about inverting it. So I've got the progression. Let me just skip through these. It should just take me back to the agenda at this point. So plates and pyramids is referring to this concept that following on from the dietary guidelines of 1980, we created these pyramids, but unfortunately the pyramids now need to be reviewed in terms of being the other way up. So let's move on to my next idea. Because of that food pyramid, we're going to be doing something which seems very contrary to what we are told constantly about eating 5 portions of fruit and vegetables every day. So I want to look at this and look at this in quite a lot of detail, because this is quite an important point. People who try and adopt a low carbohydrate diet may well hit these brick walls that, well, I'm not getting enough fruit, I'm not getting enough vegetable, I'm getting too much fat, so I need to tackle those square on so that people who follow these diets feel reconciled and comfortable with the consequences of the diet. And just as I've said there, the reason we're going to focus on the 5 a day is because I've relegated fruit to the very top of the pyramid, so therefore much lower consumption, and this layer of vegetables has become smaller and moved up the pyramid because I've taken out a lot of the vegetables, the starchy vegetables, and I'm now really just looking at the vegetables which are primarily producing, delivering fiber into the diet. Well, let me look at the 5 a day concept. It's a very interesting concept because it is different in different countries. So for example, America, believe it or not, their rules are, or their guidelines are, you have 9 portions of fruit and veg a day. In Australia, it's 7. In Denmark, it's 6. In Ireland, it's 4 or more. Switzerland, the same as us, is 5. And the French have a slightly fudged system. It's 5 or fewer, which I don't really understand. But the point I was making here is that there's no absolute science about 5 a day. If there were, that would be consistent through all countries, but we're not consistent through all countries. We seem to have a pick and mix approach. So rather than calling it 5 a day, I'm going to call it pick a number a day as the strategy for eating fruit and vegetables. And now I want to examine where it came from. And this is quite interesting for me as a statistician, for me as a numbers man who likes looking at reports and papers and studies. And it first appeared in 1991. So it's been with us for 30 years, pretty much, as a concept. And certainly if you're my generation, I sort of feel I've always grown up with the concept of 5 a day here in the UK. And it probably is one of the most well-known slogans of all slogans with regard to what we eat. And it came about in 1991 through a collaboration between 2 organizations, both American. The National Institutes of Health, the NIH, is sort of our health service equivalent in the UK, so it's the American version of that. And the National Cancer Institute is within the National Institutes of Health. It was a collaboration between them and the Produce for Better Health Foundation in the US. And the Produce for Better Health Foundation is a support body, a commercial body that supports fruit and vegetable manufacturers. So within the PBH, we've got Driscoll's, we've got Ocean Mist, we've got Sunmade, we've got Green Giant, we've got Fresh Farms as a producer of tomatoes. And we also have a big swathe of companies that produce agrochemicals and artificial fertilizers for growing fruit and vegetables. So it's a professional trade body for all these organizations, and fair enough, because obviously they have an interest in promoting their products. It seems fair and reasonable that they sponsor any work, any support of people buying their produce. So they are the people that basically funded the pick a number a day, the 5 a day over here, 9 a day in America campaign to get us to eat more fruit and vegetables. But what I'm going to show to you is that really it wasn't to do with health, it was more to do about promoting sales. And actually the slogan was produced in preparation for their 1992 annual conference, and it was presented in the 1992 annual conference as the best way to get Americans now to eat more fruit and vegetables. And in support of my argument that that's all it is, what I want to do is ask the question, prior to 1991, or in the run-up to 1991, what was the actual clinical evidence that eating 5 portions or more portions of fruit and vegetable, actually, and bear in mind it's very specific, it was a very specific, or was very specifically introduced to deal with incidence of cancer in the population. The question I'm going to ask as a statistician is, what evidence was there prior to 1991 that eating fruit and vegetables or eating more fruit and vegetables was going to reduce your risk of cancer? So I'm going to list to you the evidence that was available at that time. And I am listing to you the evidence available at that time. And just to be absolutely sure, let me list you page 2 of the evidence available at the time, that proving that eating more fruit and vegetables will reduce your risk of cancer. There was no evidence. There was no a priori, as we call it, before the event evidence to support the introduction of this idea. Now, of course, it's intuitive. You think, well, fruit and vegetables are healthy. Fair enough, although I'm going to talk about that in a moment as well. But being absolutely clear about making huge interventions on what populations eat, there was no evidence that this was a robust strategy. And I'm talking specifically with regard to cancer outcomes. Okay, let's look at a study after the event, and 20 years after the event, a big study was done. It's called the Fruit and Vegetable Intake and Overall Cancer Risk Study of 2010. And this was a big study. This was meant to be, because criticism was being leveled at food producers, say, well, where is the evidence that eating all this fruit and vegetable will reduce the risk of cancer? So this study was instigated to try and address that. And I say it's a big study. It followed people over 8 years and followed nearly 500,000 people. So if we're going to find a link between increased consumption of fruit and vegetables and a reduction in cancer risk in those people, we're going to find it in a study of this scale. But alas, there was no statistically significant difference in the cancer risk. None at all. And the study's been well scrutinized since 2010. Just not there. Small studies have indicated little variations, but this big, large-scale study pretty much said, well, I'm sorry, but eating more fruit and veg isn't going to reduce your risk of cancer. There's an issue here with regard to what I call the healthy paradox, that if you tell people they should be eating fruit and vegetables, people who are healthy and listen to health messages are more likely to do that, and the healthier people are less likely to get cancer. And big studies like this have to take that into account. It's called statistical confounding, in the sense that if we've given a message to the whole population that doing X, Y, or Z will increase your health, healthy people will do it. So it might look as though those interventions are improving health, but it actually might be just an indication that healthy people are doing it. And this study was all sort of stratified and carefully structured to try and eliminate that risk from the results. Now, you might well argue, okay, well, there's no evidence to say eating more fruit and vegetables is going to cut your cancer risk, but surely eating fruit and vegetables is highly nutritious anyway, so we should be encouraging people to do that. So now I'm going to move away specifically from cancer and just broaden it up to look now at the health issues, the health aspects of eating fruit and vegetables. So let's look at this from a sort of analytical perspective. What are the things that are in fruit and vegetables? We have water. We have starches and sugars, we have vitamins and minerals, although I've just put vitamins there, but I mean vitamins and minerals, and we have fiber. So what I'm going to look at now is which of those are important to us. So if we're playing about with our 5 a day concept, which are we at risk of losing? Well, water is fine. We can turn on the tap and get water, so that's absolutely fine. The starch and the sugars we want to eliminate anyway, so that's fine. We can not worry about that. The fiber I'm going to talk about probably in another talk. And a provocative title of that one I'm going to call the fiber fallacy. There's some very interesting studies on fiber, but I'll talk about that. And actually, with my interpretation of the 5 a day rule, we're not going to be short of fiber anyway. So let me instead look and focus on vitamins and minerals that we get from our 5 a day. Now, vitamins first, and I'm going to talk about vitamins in 2 groups. And first of all, we're going to talk about the fat-soluble vitamins. We talk about vitamins in 2 groups. We have some that are fat-soluble and some that are water-soluble. The 4 fat-soluble vitamins are vitamins A, D, E, and K. And what I want to look now at is the contribution fruit and vegetable make to our intake of those 4 fat-soluble vitamins. So let's look at vitamin A. Now, vitamin A comes in 2 forms. We have a form called carotenoids and we have a form called retinol. Carotenoids are the form that we find in a lot of vegetables, carrots being the main one. Obviously the similarity of the name helps you remember that one, but a lot of leafy green vegetables and carrots have that form of vitamin A. In Meat sources are the sources of retinol. So we find retinol in liver, in animals' liver, and cod liver oil. So basically, liver is the best delivery mechanism for vitamin A. And just as a little aside, eating polar bear liver is actually poisonous because there's too much vitamin A in it. I know that because I visited Greenland, and the only bit of a polar bear Greenlanders won't eat is the polar bear liver, because it is poisonous because of the toxic levels of vitamin A. So they've got two forms. So it would seem, okay, well, we can get a bit from vegetables, maybe get a bit from liver. Unfortunately, the human body is not efficient at processing carotenoids. And it's estimated you only get about 7% of the carotenoids in the vegetables that you eat that can be accessed by the human body. And then it has to be converted into the retinol form anyway, and that's the bit the body can't do. So if you want robust, rich sources of vitamin A, they have to come from animal or fish sources. So cod liver oil, liver, there's quite a bit in red meats of various sorts. You can eat oily fish a little bit as well, but cod liver oil is probably the best supplemental form of the vitamin A, or eating organ meat on a regular basis. Well, eating lots of vegetables will not stock you up on vitamin A. It's just not right in the right form for humans. Okay, so let's now look at vitamin D, the next fat-soluble vitamin in my list. Again, there's two forms of vitamin D. We have D2 and D3. D3 we find in liver again, cod liver oil, liver organ meat from animals. We find it quite richly in oily fish as well, sardines and salmon as we've got there. The D2 form we find in certain vegetables. Mushrooms is a good one. Mushrooms, if you leave mushrooms out in the sun for an hour, even cut mushrooms, they will convert through sunlight material within the mushroom into vitamin D in the form of vitamin D2. So you can get vitamin D2 from mushrooms. But I'm afraid the argument is the same. The animal form of vitamin D3 is the form that humans need. We are animals. So eating cod liver oil, eating oily fish delivers wonderfully rich sources of vitamin D3. To get the vitamin D, ignoring the difference that it's D2 versus D3, just talking about the amount of vitamin D, from 1 tablespoon of cod liver oil, you have to eat 3 kilograms of mushrooms. And it's the wrong form of vitamin D. So if you want a rich source of vitamin D, I'm afraid that's got to come from your cod liver oil, your oily fish, your organ meat, and a little bit from red meats as well. So it's not looking good for our 5 a day in the sense if we're looking to stock up on our fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin E is the next one. Well, this one is looking very promising because the best source of vitamin E, sunflower seeds. But of course, most people wouldn't consider sunflower seeds as part of their 5 a day. We think about fresh green vegetables, fresh fruit. Well, actually, the best source of vitamin C are sesame seeds. But not meat source, sesame seeds are the best source of your vitamin E. And then vitamin K, the final one. Well, guess what? We have 2 forms of vitamin K as well. We have a plant form and we have an animal form. The animal form we tend to find in, for example, the dark chicken meat, so thigh, wing, leg meat of the poultry, and in eggs. They're good sources of vitamin K2. Vitamin K1 we find in the the leafy green vegetables, spinach particularly. But same rule applies, I'm afraid. The K1 form is not accessible, not readily accessible in the human metabolism. We need the K2 form. So you will get some from a little bit of green vegetable, but you won't get much at all. You'll get far richer, just a few eggs a day or a bit of dark chicken meat, and that's your daily quota of vitamin K2, easily satisfied. So in terms of the fat-soluble vitamins, sticking to 5 a day is not adding to your intake of fat-soluble vitamins. So if you reduce your 5 a day, you're not depleting your sources of the fat-soluble vitamins. Okay, that's the fat-solubles. Let's now move on to the water solubles. We have 2 water soluble vitamins. We have the B group, so it's not just 2 vitamins, it's a group of vitamins, the B group and vitamin C. Let's look at the vitamin B group. And there are 8 forms of vitamin B. They all have different names, although we tend to make it easy and just give them symbols like that: B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B7, B9, and B12. I'm going to draw up a little table, so I'm drawing little bars across here to make it easier to read in the table. I'm going to compare meat with fruit and veg sources of each of those B vitamins. Well, meat is a great source of all of them. There is no there's no B vitamin you cannot get from good quality meat. And that's all sorts of meats, not just organ meat, all sorts of meat. The fruit and veg column is a little bit mixed. So vitamins B1, B5, and B9, no problem at all. Good sources in lots of vegetable material. Rather more limited sources of B2, B3, B6, and to an extent B7 in your fruit and veg sources. You won't get B12 from a fruit and vegetable source. So yes, you can get some B vitamins, but as long as you're eating meat in your diet, you're not missing anything by not eating the fruit and veg. And if you are eating, or if you're not eating meat, you do have to consider your sources of vitamin B12 on a diet. If you're eating dairy, if you're eating fish, you're absolutely fine. But if you're not eating meat or fish in any form, then you may have to consider supplementing with vitamin B12. So I'm going to include vitamin C in this next bit of discussion. Here's something which is throwing a little bit more information at you, but is bringing some of that to a conclusion, if you like. I've got 6 foods across the top here: liver, sardine, sunflower seeds, broccoli, apple, and whole wheat flour. Down the side here, I've got many, not quite all, but many of the vitamins that we need to be looking at here. And you'll see, I'll ignore calories, and protein quality is interesting actually, because it shows that the animal sources are much higher. I won't talk about the scale they're measured on, but that number is a measure of the how closely the profile of the protein matches the protein the human body needs. And fish meat and liver meat, organ meat, most closely approximate that. But the A vitamins, the B, the C, the D, the E, and the K, largely we're going to get them from, if you eat liver in your diet, you're going to get the best sorts. So the red ones are the best in each row of this table. And we can see that obviously vitamin A, liver is a good source of most of the A and B vitamins. Interestingly, it's also got vitamin C in it. It's got more vitamin C than apple. Which most people don't realize. Most animals can produce vitamin C. Humans can't, so we have to consume our vitamin C. We can't make our vitamin C. But many animals do make their own vitamin C, and so liver, preferably liver that's still a bit bloody when you've cooked it, that's going to have quite a bit of vitamin C left in it. So you'll notice here, though, just to get the best source of vitamin C, we've got some broccoli in the diet. But if you had liver, some oily fish for your vitamin D, and some sunflower seeds for your vitamin E. It also stocks up on B6 as well. It's quite good for B6 and B1. Then we've got a good mix of broccoli, sunflower seeds, sardines, and liver. We've got all the vitamin profile that we need. So we've got 1 portion of our 5 a day to provide that. We've got other things in there as well. Let's move on to the minerals. I didn't mention the minerals before. We've got the same 6 foods across the top. Again, you'll see the liver, sardines, and sunflower seeds pretty much get that covered. Other than manganese, we do need some manganese in the diet, and whole wheat flour is a good example of that, but whole wheat flour, or good source of that. Whole wheat flour, though, is a source of starch, so we're not ideally looking for that. So certainly ladies like this column. At the front of the table, I've added cocoa, so basically the raw ingredient that goes in chocolate. And what do you notice? It gets the red numbers for pretty much every row on that table. So as long as it's high percentage dark chocolate you're eating, so I don't want chocolate with sugar added and other additives. So if you can go for 90, 100% chocolate, or use raw cacao powder and add it to things like bulletproof coffees, you're getting that lovely rich source of most of the key minerals in your diet without having to resort to wheat flour for your manganese. So the upshot of all of that is that if you ask me what's my 5 a day, they are these. So my 5 a day, to make sure I get all the fat-soluble vitamins, a good dose of the water-soluble vitamin B and C, and all the minerals, so the nutrients, the macronutrients, or the micronutrients that we need in our diet: liver, sunflower seeds, broccoli, cacao powder, and bone broth. The liver we saw is really nutritious. Sunflower seeds, we get couple that almost like are missing from liver. We get those in sunflower seeds. What I tend to do with my sunflower seeds is I've got a food process like a NutriBullet. I grind them down into a powder and sprinkle that on if I have a bowl of berries, maybe with a bit of cream. That's a good way to get my sunflower seeds. Broccoli is a great source of vitamin C, so I have broccoli quite a few times a week. Yes, I put cacao powder in my bulletproof coffees, so I get my mineral load through that. And I have bone broth. I cook a lot of meat on the bone and make stock and broth from that. But on days I don't have that, in my fridge I have a pot of bone broth concentrate that I bought from Amazon, and I just make that like a cup of soup, so I can get a cup of bone broth every day. That is the nutritious, healthy 5 a day, because that is profile matched to the micronutrients that your body needs, rather than eating fruit and vegetables. So my diet does include fibrous green vegetables, and some days I will probably have the equivalent of 5 days worth of my 5 a day, rather, not 5 days worth, my 5 a day, but in spinach, kale, broccoli, asparagus and so on. They deliver some carbohydrates, so they're my sort of my little bit of carbohydrate that I get in the day. So I will have 5 a day some days, and occasionally I will have the odd berry. But I am not motivated on my 5 a day because I feel I'm missing something nutritionally. The 5 a day deliver to me variety into my diet on the days that I do 5 a day, but on days that I don't take any vegetables or very few vegetables and no fruit, I am actually getting my 5 a day, which is the liver, the sunflower seeds, the broccoli, the cacao, and the bone broth. So that's my position on the 5 a day. And the rule with regard vegetables, a simple rule, if it helps. Generally speaking, and it's a general rule, you're going to find exceptions, but the vegetables that are grown above the ground tend to be the fibrous, low-starch vegetables. The vegetables that come from below the ground are the ones that contain the starch and the carbohydrates. So I avoid the below-ground vegetables, the carrots, the parsnips, the potatoes, the sweet potatoes, very sparingly have those. The vegetables above ground are the spinach, the kale, the broccoli, the cauliflower, the rocket, something which is providing fiber. I will have some fiber in my diet, but I don't overly obsess about fiber in my diet. And they are providing some nutrients. Remember, there's the B vitamins. There are some B vitamins in my vegetables, but they come from elsewhere in my diet already. And my broccoli provides my vitamin C. And there's no fat-soluble vitamins from them that are pretty much usable anyway. So I'm getting a few above ground vegetables, but I'm not obsessing about my 5 a day. So that was my my view on the 5 a day. So when somebody comes to me, I've gone to them and we've had the discussion. I said, right, start cutting down on your fruit and your sugar and starch sources. So therefore you're taking a lot of fruit and vegetable out of your diet. And they say to me, what about my 5 a day? That's what I'm going to say in response. Now that might be quite controversial. I will look forward to any discussion we might have after the talk on that one. But that is from a nutritionally analytic point of view with regard to the 5 a day. Okay, so let's carry on in this theme of, okay, people are going to try a low carbohydrate diet. What are the other issues? Well, the other big one is if you're eating less carbohydrate, you've got to eat more fat or more something. There's the 3 macronutrients, fat, protein, and carbohydrate. If you're cutting the carbohydrate, you've got to stock up more on the other 2 to fill your plate. For various reasons, this might be a separate talk or something that's part of a separate talk, we tend to sort of limit protein intake for a number of reasons. And some people who looked at the food chart that I attached with last week's talk will have seen I talked about 1 to 2 grams per kilo of lean body mass rule with protein. I'll talk about that on another talk. But essentially, therefore, because there's a limit on protein, if we're going to fill the plate, we've got to stock it up on fats, be that, as you see, the animal fats, eggs, cream, dairy, fat around the meat, and so on. And we do, though, live in a fat-phobic era. I gave some insights to the history of that, how that came about from the George McGovern hearings in 1977 in my last talk. And underlying all of that is this idea that fat clogs your arteries. We have a fear of fat. We think that eating fat is going to give you heart attacks. And here's a diagrammatic visualization of that. And of course, in our heads, we're thinking, well, every bit of fat that we eat is going to stock up this furry stuff that's lining our arteries, and eventually it becomes so much the blood vessels can't get, the blood cells can't get through, and then that leads to cardiovascular events. So that's what I want to talk to you for this part of the talk. I want to look at the role of fat and cholesterol. That seems to be bundled up in the same argument. Is it fat? Is it saturated fat? Is it cholesterol? All these things that seem to clog your arteries. I'm going to use an analogy, and it's one I've used before. I write articles occasionally for a magazine called Pampering Times, and this is one of the papers, one of the articles I've published in there. And I'm going to introduce you to a character called Marty the Martian. And I want you to imagine Marty the Martian has been given a job. He's been given a job to fly to Earth and observe the UK road network. And he's been asked to come up with some explanations about why we get road blockages on those networks. So he flies to Earth and he observes what goes on in our road networks. And he notices that we tend to get blockages in the road network when there are road traffic accidents. And he notices that whenever there's road traffic accidents, there's a lot of ambulances around. And the more he sees this, the more he can't stop seeing it. Whenever there's a road blockage, there's usually an accident. And when there's an accident, there's usually an ambulance. And he's quite clever, is Marty. So I found a correlation here, ambulances and road blockages. More ambulances, more road blockages. And he then gets a little bit more sophisticated with his theory because he notices there's two sorts of ambulance. There's ambulances which are just ordinary ambulances, but there's ambulances with blue flashing lights. And he noticed it's far worse when you've got ambulances with blue flashing lights. If you've got ambulances, yes, you get some accidents and you get some blockages, fair enough. But when you get ambulances with blue flashing lights, that's a really bad news. You really like to get major holdups on the road network, major problems. So Marty starts developing this theory. There's good ambulances and there's bad ambulances. He notices ambulance are involved with road blockages, and certain types of ambulance are more prone to be linked to those road blockages. So he's got all his observations and he scuttles back home and he files his report, what to do to prevent road traffic accidents. And this is his theory. What you do is you get rid of blue flashing light ambulances because they are the things that are linked to most of the road blockages, most of the severe road blockages. And so is born what I call the blue flashing light ambulance clogs your roads theory. An observational theory because ambulances happen to be at the scene of accidents. And what I'm going to show you is that although it's an analogy, it's exactly what's gone on with the fat clogs your arteries hypothesis. It was stated, or it started from observations about the presence of fat, saturated fat and cholesterol at places in your blood network where there are blockages. And then because of that, they were there at the time, and they seem to be there for an association, the theory went more cholesterol, more fat, more saturated fat in your arteries, you're more likely to get your blockages. So just to bring the analogy, the good ambulances are equivalent to your good cholesterol, and the bad ambulances are equivalent to your bad cholesterol. But unfortunately, and this is actually a sign that the theory is a slightly shaky theory, do I mean good cholesterol and bad cholesterol? Or do I mean saturated fat? Or do I mean fat generally? And if I push someone on saying what clogs their arteries, they'll start to get a little bit unstuck if I start pushing, well, is it your good cholesterol? Is it your bad cholesterol? Is it saturated fat or just every fat? So there's a little lack of clarity. We've absorbed the headline message, but we need to go into the detail. So I'm going to now pursue some of that detail. I'm going to do it in two ways. I'm going to do it in two levels. I'm going to use some common sense arguments to say, maybe this doesn't sound right, but I'm going to have to look at some actually robust scientific studies as well, because I need to really just make you as comfortable as you can be that the evidence is that you will not clog your arteries by eating more fat or putting more fat into your diet. So let me put the question mark over here, the fat clogs your arteries theory over here, and let's look at fat generally. Well, Pauline the Paleo and Vic the Victorian ate far more fat than we ever do. We know that from records. Obviously, Victorian times, we've got records that are written records. Paleo, we've got archaeological records. There are blueprints you can see within mineral content within bones, and even just in from middens, and you look at the remains in areas they cooked in their settlements. We know that Paleolithic people and the Victorians ate a lot more fat than us, and yet they did not have heart disease anywhere near on the scale that we do now. If fat was causing it, they ate more of it, they should have had more of those conditions. And just to fuddle that up a little bit even more, we have to have fat in diet. There are essential fatty acids. You cannot survive without eating fat. So is it reasonable to assume that the thing, or one of the things that we have to eat, is also one of the things that's going to kill us? That would seem to be quite a little mismatch. So there's just some thoughts with regard, simple arguments against fat. Here's an interesting one, saturated fat. Now, I'm not going to delve into the chemistry of saturated versus unsaturated. I might do that on a later talk because it is interesting in its own right. But one of the diets that's often advocated as being very good for being heart healthy is the Mediterranean diet. And one of the principles, or one of the key parts of the Mediterranean diet, is having lots of extra virgin olive oil in that diet. So here's a question. This would work better in a room full of people, but I'll pose the question, leave a pregnant pause and answer it. Which do you think has more saturated fat? 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil or 100 grams of pork chop? There's the expectant pause. You know, because I've asked the question, that probably the answer is counterintuitive, and it certainly is. The tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil has 4.9 grams of saturated fat in it. The pork chop has just about 2. So there's a big difference there. Now, saturated fat, I'm going to show you, isn't bad for you. But even if it was, why does the Mediterranean diet improve cardiovascular outcomes when there's potentially more of it in the diet? One of your key parts of the diet has a lot of saturated fat in it, or has a profile that is higher saturated fat than even some animal sources. Let's look at 2 fats. We've got pure lard. We've got coconut oil. Coconut oil is very much seen as a healthy fat, a healthy oil. If we look at the saturated fat profiles, how much of those fats is saturated fat? Well, the coconut oil wins hands down. So if saturated fat is so bad for us, why is coconut oil seen as a health food? It's 63% saturated fat compared to just under 40% with animal fat, lard. Okay, what about cholesterol? Well, here's an interesting thing. If cholesterol causes heart disease, how do we explain this? On average, women have higher cholesterol levels than men, significantly so. And interestingly, and in addition to that, men have the highest rate of heart disease. So if cholesterol causes heart disease, why does half the population that has lower levels of cholesterol have lower levels of heart disease? Men have less cholesterol on average, yet have more cardiovascular outcomes. It's counterintuitive. So these are my intuitive arguments saying, well, let's look at this a little bit more. And the thing is about cholesterol, cholesterol is essential for your body to function. Every cell has a membrane that has cholesterol in it. The cell would not function without cholesterol. We need cholesterol to make bile salts to digest fat in our digestive tract. Cholesterol is a starting point for many of the hormones that control things in our body: temperature, blood sugar level, salt level, levels of uric acid in the body. The hormones that control that start off as cholesterol, or cholesterol is a key part in the production of those hormones. 25% of your cholesterol in your body is in your brain. Your brain would not function without it. Cholesterol is the starting point for making vitamin D in your skin. You know, we talk about sunlight on the skin to create vitamin D. Well, the raw material in your skin that the sunlight acts on is cholesterol. And cholesterol, as we'll see, this is quite critical. It's to do with the ambulance story. Cholesterol is involved in preparing immune cells to deal with issues in your body. So you need cholesterol in your body. So what is this thing about good cholesterol and bad cholesterol? Well, that little diagram there is the chemical formula of cholesterol. It's the only chemical formula of cholesterol. There is not a good cholesterol and a bad cholesterol. That is the only formula of cholesterol. What differs are the vehicles that carry cholesterol around your body. If ever you've had a cholesterol blood test, you might have seen things like HDL and LDL. You may not have seen VLDL, which is a shame because actually that's the one that's most interesting. Sometimes it's called triglyceride, but they're to do with the carriers that carry cholesterol around your body. They're called lipoproteins. The final L in each of those 3 abbreviations is lipoprotein. HDL is high density lipoprotein, LDL is low density lipoprotein, and VLDL is very low density lipoprotein. So they're just different carriers, different vehicles for carrying the cholesterol around your body. So we don't have this clear-cut good cholesterol, bad cholesterol. We might have good carriers, bad carriers, but cholesterol is cholesterol. There is no variations with that. So they're my intuitive arguments, but I've got to be more robust because we've got to say, absolutely, can we dispel the cholesterol, saturated fat, good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, delete as applicable myth that causes and clogs your arteries? So I'm going to identify 6 pivotal studies that show that. It's going to be a bit techie. Well, I'm going to try and keep it relatively high level, but these are turning point studies, and you'll notice the dates on them are relatively 2006. The Framingham started in 1948, but it's the reporting in this century that's been the key thing. But I'm going to look at the key points of 6 studies. Now, this one I love because it's simplicity. It was reported in 2009, and in this study they looked at 137, just shy of 137,000 hospitalizations of people with cardiac events. So basically some form of heart disease, admitted to hospital, 547 hospitals in West Coast America over a period of a few years. And the beauty of this study was that every single patient had their lipid panel measured. So as they went into hospital, they had their cholesterol markers, their fat markers in their blood, their lipid panel measured. So we've got really good, robust measures of the levels of each of those things in their blood, the cholesterols, the various transport mechanisms for cholesterol in their blood, and for 137,000 patients who we know are cardiac patients. They're admitted to hospital because of a cardiac event. The headline here, people with LDL, so that's the low density lipoprotein, the one that people in the vernacular call bad cholesterol, below. Now in America, they have a slightly different system. Most of the results I see for people over here are on a slightly different number system. The UK system, 130 milligram per 100 milliliters, is about 3.7, 3.8. If your bad cholesterol is below, or they found in this study, those people with bad cholesterol below 3.7, 3.8 nearly had 3/4 of all the heart attacks. Now let that sink in. If we're claiming LDL cholesterol is your bad cholesterol, these are people who had heart attacks, then their bad cholesterol should be the high end of the scale. They should be the people with the highest. No, they were the people with the lowest. The lowest levels of bad, inverted commas, cholesterol were in these heart patients compared to the general population. So having low levels of the bad cholesterol from this study, 140,000 patients very nearly, complete measurement of their lipid panels, would suggest contrary to the idea that bad cholesterol is indeed bad. So that's a hospital admission study of 2009. Now, Framingham, I don't know my geography of America, I don't know where Framingham is, but it's a population, it's a centre population where since 1948, they have been tracking people, their children, their children's children, and now I think there's the generation beyond that's part of the study as well, and they're measuring key metrics of this population forevermore, potentially, whilst the study continues. So we've got really good long-run data on health markers, measurable health markers, lifestyle choices, and the health outcomes for those people. It's the only study of that sort of scale that's currently going on and has been going on for, as you can see, 70 years pretty much. In this study, they noticed that 90% of the total cholesterol levels measured in this study were proven to be useless by themselves for predicting the risk of coronary heart disease in the general population. In other words, measuring total cholesterol was a meaningless predictor of how these people would, whether they have cardiovascular health outcomes or not. Indeed, twice as many people who had a lifetime total cholesterol less than 5.2, so this is now on the scale you'd recognize on English numbers, 5.2, twice as many people who had levels below that had coronary heart disease outcomes compared to people who had total cholesterol higher than 7.8. Again, it's the wrong way around. If you had low total cholesterol, according to the cholesterol theory, you should have better coronary heart death outcomes. In the Framingham study, over 70 years, that is proven not to be the case. The longest running study of a continuous study of population over lifetime of the individuals and the generations that follow on from them as well. So that one again is pointing in the wrong direction. The WHIDMT, the Women's Health Institute Dietary Modification Trial. I've actually missed 2 letters out of that because you reach the point of losing the will to live when acronyms become too long, but it's actually the Women's Health Initiative Randomized Controlled Dietary Modification Trial of 2006. This was a biggie, another biggie, 49,000 postmenopausal women. The reason they chose that is because a lot of the studies prior to that had focused on men. So this study was, what about women? So 49,000 postmenopausal women, tracked over 6 to 8 years, looked at cardiovascular outcome, but they divided them into 2. It's an interventional study. They got half the group to follow a low-fat diet, half the group to follow a normal diet. The study found that those women who followed the low-fat diet did not significantly reduce their risk of coronary heart disease or cardiovascular disease outcome or stroke compared to the women who just followed a normal diet. So going low fat did not improve the coronary heart disease outcomes of that population. It was about half it, so it's about 24,000 women. What's more troubling, women on the low fat diet who had heart disease before the study started had an increased risk of worsening heart disease during the trial compared to similar women in the normal diet group. So if you had heart disease at the outset and you went on a low-fat diet, you had a worse outcome. 49,000 women followed up to 8 years. So not a trivial study, big study, as big as they come. A very expensive study. That study cost $700 million. It's one of the biggest epidemiological studies ever conducted because they were desperate to prove the fat hypothesis, and the data, unfortunately, moved away from it. Here's the mortality study of the elderly in 2016. This looked at nearly 70,000 over 60-year-olds. And again, over a period of time, and looked at their various measures of cholesterol. So we're talking about good and bad, low-density lipoproteins, high-density lipoproteins. High levels of LDL, so the bad cholesterol as we call it, is inversely associated with mortality in most people over 60 years. Now, inversely associated, i.e. the lower the level of your bad cholesterol, the more likely you are to die of coronary heart disease in the over 60s. And it says that this finding is inconsistent with the cholesterol hypothesis. Since elderly people with high bad cholesterol, LDL, live as long or longer than those with low bad cholesterol, our analysis provides reason to question the validity of the cholesterol hypothesis. So again, big study, and in a very specific demographic, the over 60-year-olds. The lower your bad cholesterol, the better your health outcome. Big study, quite recent study, 2016. The Prospective Urban Rural Epidemiological Study, and this looked at 135,000 cardiac patients over 7.5 years. And this one here, the study, the result, high carbohydrate intake was associated with high risk of total mortality, whereas total fat and individual types of fat were related with lower total mortality. Paraphrase that, the more carbs you ate, the more likely you were to die in this study. The more fat you ate, the less likely you were to die in this study. And they looked at cardiovascular disease, myocardial infarction, basically heart attacks, cardiovascular disease mortality, and whereas actually saturated fat particularly had a very strong inverse relationship with stroke. The more saturated fat you ate, the less likely you were to get a stroke. So again, it's saying, should this be reason to modify and reconsider the global dietary guidelines? And my final study, the WISE study, the Women's Ischemia Syndrome Evaluation Study of 2017, this looked at scans, angiographs, looking at arterial plaque, the creation of plaque on the insides of arterial walls. And this one here, this is quite pivotal as well. It fits in with some of the ideas from last week's talk. And you'll see in my next diagram, it fits in here as well. Type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance is the single most important predictor of disease progression in women with established coronary heart disease. So looking at the angiographs, looking at the plaques on the arterial walls, the more type 2 diabetes prevalence, the more likely you'll see plaque formation on the arteries. And serum cholesterol concentration, so basically blood cholesterol levels, is without predictive value. So there's my 6 studies. There are more, but I just sort of cherry picked 6 of them, which are looking for what is the evidence. The evidence does seem to consistently point to this idea. Cholesterol levels are not correlated, or if they are, they're inversely correlated to cardiovascular outcomes, i.e. the higher your cholesterol levels, the more you seem to be protected. Okay, well, having told you that it's not fat that causes heart disease, I can't leave it there. I've got to sort of tell you what does, or what the latest model, latest thinking is. It's not going to be a simple ride. I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I can, actually. This is a diagram from the Lancet, the medical journal, so that shows the sort of level we're at. But I'm going to try and keep it into simple building blocks and show how it's glucose in your blood and refined synthetic oils are contributory to your plaque formation in your blood cells. So the plaque is, that's the word we give for this clogging of the arteries, which seems to be associated with cardiovascular disease. So on this diagram here, this white space is like the inside of a blood vessel. So where I'm moving my cursor now is where your blood cells and your blood will be pumping. This sort of colored area is the lining of the artery wall. Okay, we're going to go through several stages of this process. We're starting with, there's the posh name, hyperglycemia, extra glucose, extra sugar in your blood. That sugar, if there's too much for too long, it starts attacking the cells that line your artery wall. It starts sticking to the surface. And those cells start flagging that they're under attack. That glucose is sticking to their cell membranes, and those cells saying, whoa, this isn't good. And they send out messenger signals so that blood cells that are involved in the immune response get called to their rescue. They're called monocytes, doesn't matter what they're called, but they're called to the rescue. Signals from these cells lining the wall tell these monocytes to come and start sorting the mess out. And as part of the response, the cells lining the blood vessel will separate a little bit just to allow these monocytes into the wall of the blood vessel so they can do their job. Now, when a monocyte has entered the cell, it needs an extra ingredient to start doing its job. And guess what? That ingredient's cholesterol. That cholesterol is brought to it by the low density lipoproteins. Remember, they're the carriers, they're the vehicles carrying cholesterol. This particular carrier is the key one to get the cholesterol to these monocytes so they can do their job. But there's a problem. If you're eating refined synthetic oils and there's too much glucose in your blood, you've oxidized, doesn't matter what that means, but you've oxidized these LDLs, you've put faulty tires or you've put damaged brakes onto the vehicle that's carrying the cholesterol. So when these low density lipoproteins, the carriers of cholesterol, they too get in through the spaces and they start charging up the monocytes with cholesterol. They don't only dump their cholesterol. LDL carries other things as well. There's room in the vehicle, not just for cholesterol, but other forms of fat as well. And whereas normally an LDL that's doing its job properly only dumps what's needed, a damaged LDL dumps too much. And so these monocytes and the macrophages around them start doing things they shouldn't do because they've got other forms of fat involved with them. And we create things called foam cells. And it's the foam cells that line the artery wall that then cause the narrowing of the artery. That is what causes the precondition for cardiovascular outcomes. Yes, cholesterol's there, but cholesterol is just doing its job. It's the ambulance that Marty spotted. The ambulance is doing its job. There's a car accident, you've got to get an ambulance there. There's damage to the endothelial cells of the vessel wall. We've got to get cholesterol there so the immune cells can start dealing with it. The problem is we've damaged the carrier of the cholesterol, so it all goes to pot. We've damaged it with refined synthetic oils, and we've damaged it by having too much glucose in the blood. I'll be quite interested to see whether that made sense, because that's quite a complex concept. But if you think about ambulances being in the wrong place, well, the right place, but being accused of doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, think of that as your cholesterol and the LDLs as being a carrier of cholesterol. You'll get an idea of how we've got the message a bit mixed. And just to finish, I couldn't get this in a high resolution, so I'm not making this picture any bigger on the slide because we lose clarity. But this is just one campaign poster I found with regard cholesterol and clogging arteries and fat clogging arteries. And the message is mixed because they're saying eat healthy diet, prevent obesity. Absolutely agree with that. And we've got foods here that we've got a burger, we've got chips, we've got a milkshake, we've got an ice cream cone. I think we've got a muffin there. Absolutely. But they spoil it all. Too much fat clogs your arteries. And actually they're right with these foods. The burger, it's the carbohydrate in the bun. The chips, it's the carbohydrate in the chips. The milkshake, it's the carbohydrate and the processed nature of the milkshake. It's the carbs and the processing of the ice cream cone. It's the carbs and the processing, and probably the refined synthetic oils as well in the muffin. They're the things that contribute to your clogging of your arteries. It's not the fat per se. I wouldn't necessarily say the meat in the bun is particularly good either, but I'm going to focus more on the refined synthetic fats and the carbohydrates. So there we go. That is my, oh, we've gone back again. I don't know why I went back there. Let's scoot this through. Quite why that went through again. I must have pressed the reverse button, so let me just let this go through. It's a good little recap. You can see the stages of the sequence that take us into the clogging of the artery. And then we've got our little poster, and then hopefully we move on from here. Perfect. So that's what really clogs your arteries. So that was the meat of the course, the session I was planning. I'm just going to spend a few minutes now finishing off to give a little bit more perspective what your plate might look like. Tantalizing again, because I'm not really giving a lot of practical advice, but what I'm doing, I'm setting the scene so that you're more understanding of why I think it's okay to have a lot of fat in your diet, why it's okay not to have so much fruit in your diet, and what the health outcomes and issues will be with regard to that. So rather than a pyramid or a plate, I've got a pie chart. And in the ideal world for me, 65% of your calories come from fat, 10% come from carbs, and a quarter, 25% would come from protein. And the sorts of foods in each of those groups, I'm just going to scatter around the diagram. So my carbs are going to be my leafy green vegetables and a few berries. They're relatively quite low in sugar, so just a few berries. My protein is going to come in meat and fish and a few nuts and seeds, maybe the odd pulse. I tend not to eat pulses because I do eat meat, but nuts and seeds and pulses. My fat, also some of which brings protein as well, but I've got my olive oil, my lard, my coconut oil, my cream, my olives, my avocados, my eggs, my cheese, and again, my nuts and seeds and the oil in sardines and so on, bring my fat to the equation as well. So that's my ideal pie chart. If you remember from the talk I gave last week, which, as I say, you may have seen or you've watched since, I gave an example of a day's worth of food that had a staggering amount of carbohydrate in it. Well, if we do the pie chart for that day of food, it was orange juice, muesli and toast for breakfast, a latte and a cookie for lunch, jacket potato for mid-morning, a jacket potato and a low-fat yogurt for lunch, an apple in the afternoon, spag bol and strawberries and cream in the evening. Well, the pie chart for that is on the right-hand side, and the pie chart I'm aiming for is on the left. So can you see the protein is about the same? Perfect. But the fat and the carbs have sort of become transposed. We've got it the wrong way around. If I give you an example of what fits the bill very nicely with my 65% fat, I've got a spinach and cheese omelette for breakfast, maybe some almonds to nibble on at lunchtime. I've got avocado, olives and sardines with a bit of lemon for lunch. I've got a broccoli, cauliflower, what's left of the spinach, chicken bake for the evening. And I've got a bowl of blueberries, full fat yogurt, and a few sunflower seeds for dinner. And that would give me my profile of food for the day. 65%, about 2/3 of it in fat, 1/4 of it in protein, about 10% of it in carbohydrates. So a very big shift from that previous pie chart where 2/3 of it, or 60% of it certainly, was coming from carbohydrates. And they're all natural fats. I've got no refined fats in there, no synthetic fats, no artificially created fats. They're all natural intrinsic fats. Got some from the avocado, the olives, the sardines, a little bit in the egg, and a little bit in the full fat yogurt, and a little bit in the sunflower seeds. And we've got, so I'd have a cup of bone broth. There aren't many calories in bone broth, I'd have that, but I've got my broccoli, I've got my sunflower seeds. One of my cups of coffee I'd have as a bulletproof coffee with a bit of cacao in it. So I'm getting, other than my liver, there's no liver in that day, but I'm getting my 5 a day in that day's worth of food with regard to that. So I'm going to probably skip because I was aiming to talk for about an hour and a quarter. So just to give you interest, I'll just skip through this very quickly. How I converted that pie chart into quantities, I did it like that. I used that when you burn a gram of protein, a gram of carbs, and a gram of fat, you get so many calories. And so I used those numbers to then say, well, okay, to meet my pie chart, I need 50 grams of carbs, 125 grams of protein, and about 100 grams of fat. And there's various websites. If you type in any food on these websites, it tells you how much carb, how much protein, how much fat are in each of the foods. So what you can do is, and it's what I did, I set up a, see, it's done it again. I don't know whether I'm pressing something without realizing I'm pressing it, but it's gone back a stage. So let me just cycle through those again. You can do a little spreadsheet and you work out what can go in the spreadsheet to meet all those numbers. And when I do that, I come up with these quantities. So that day of food I showed you is slightly off, but not very far. 51 grams of carbs rather than 50, 108 grams of protein rather than 125, 173 grams of fat rather than 160. And in total, it gives me 2,100 calories. So not bad. For me as a man, probably I'd eat a few more calories than that each day. But, you know, for me, that's not a bad number of calories. Gives me pretty much what I need. And that's the profile of how I met those calories. Okay. The easiest thing to do, though, when you're starting out, doing analysis like that, breaking down the plate, is probably something I could do for you. But to keep it simple, just focus on cutting down your carbs. So work out what's bringing carbohydrate into your diet, start reducing it, and fill up on natural fats and proteins. That's a much simpler, pragmatic approach, something I'll talk about in maybe coming sessions in more detail, but that's a much more pragmatic starting point. Well, rather than worrying about pie charts and spreadsheets, if you can target that, work out where carbs are coming from in your diet, try and reduce those. Don't go necessarily for eliminating straight away, bring them down, start reducing them, but fill up on natural intrinsic fats. That's a good way of starting and build on that as a progression. This was the food chart that I attached to the notes for last week's talk. I talk about fish, meat, dairy, the leafy green vegetables, and I'll attach it to the recording of this week as well, so you can have a longer look at this one. I've identified the nuts that are low in inflammatory oils and low in carbohydrate, a few of the typical supplements, where you need to take vitamin D3, have some oils to supplement, medium chain triglyceride type oils, oils to cook with, which are not synthetic oils, good natural oils that have a good heat point. So it gives you an idea of the sort of foods that you should be thinking about to give you your balanced diet in this regime of cutting your carbohydrate intake. I'm going to finish with some wise words on a little video. So let me just do a little recap before we get to that. So we got in the previous talks, sugar, starch, and synthetic oils are all contributing to this thing called insulin resistance. And I've shown you that if we cut those things out of the diet and add good natural intrinsic fats, then we can actually bring about a reduction in your insulin resistance. And the insulin resistance, one of the consequences is extra glucose in your blood. And we saw on that picture of the inside of your artery wall, that was the starting event for giving you plaques on the inside of your artery walls, that excess sugar. So let's talk now. Let me show you, it's a couple of minutes worth of clipping. It's from Sky News just a few days ago. I didn't take the dates. No, I didn't keep the date. But this is Dr. Aseem Malhotra. He's a very well-spoken, outspoken cardiac surgeon who's very much into insulin resistance, as you'll hear when I start going, being interviewed by Sky News in response to Boris saying we need to fight obesity. And you'll see he talks about insulin resistance and he talks about processed food in particular, but he talks about insulin resistance and what might be causing that.
Really, the big issue, which has been ignored for a very long time, is, of course, obesity is a problem. It's a major problem in this country. 1 in 4 people are obese. 60% of adults are overweight or obese. But really what's going on from a medical perspective, from a biological perspective, is that people who have conditions associated with excess body fat are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, and it's even now linked to things like cancer and dementia. And the term that we use in medical speak to describe that is something called insulin resistance. Now, why that's important, Kate, and why that needs to be addressed more, in a more kind of robust way by the Prime Minister, is that even people who have a normal weight will suffer from conditions related to excess body fat. So, for example, only 1 in 3 people with a normal body mass index, according to data in America, and our data is probably quite similar, are metabolically healthy. And type 2 diabetes in people from BAME backgrounds does seem to affect them at much lower levels of what we call body weight, more related to abdominal obesity or excess body fat there. So what am I saying? I'm saying actually the real problem, the bigger elephant in the room, if you like, beyond obesity, is the fact that it's estimated that 80% of Brits, 80% of UK adults have excess body fat, a term called overfat, and that's what we should be focusing on. So everybody's really vulnerable to this. Now, what do we do about it? Well, we've discussed this before, and what the Prime Minister should be focusing on is really targeting the food industry and our consumption of ultra-processed food, which is now more than half of the British diet. And unfortunately, a couple of issues that I've been researching and been involved in looking at over a number of years. One is the fact that our dietary guidelines, which come through NHS England and Public Health England in particular, have been influenced, unfortunately, by the food industry, the very industries that are kind of selling us and promoting the foods that are causing the problem in the first place. So there needs to be a complete dissociation from companies that endorse and promote ultra-processed foods from Public Health England. And the current, just to give you a very basic example, the current Eat Well guide, which is supposed to represent a healthy, balanced diet, unfortunately has junk food on there. And that has been exposed in the British Journal of Sports Medicine by obesity researcher Zoe Harcombe, who highlighted that most of the members, or a significant number of the members who made up that plate, were members of companies that are basically, promote fast food and junk food. So there's one big issue there. But actually, the more important issue, I think, is the fact that our food environment has become saturated with these sorts of foods that make, junk food the default option. Even hospitals, Kate, for example, have become a branding opportunity for the junk food industry. 75% of food purchased in hospitals is not healthy. So this affects the staff. It affects the fact that, it basically influences the weight and health of staff, and then affects their performance as well. So we're all really vulnerable to this, and I think the Prime Minister needs to really focus on making sure that we fix the food, and if we fix the food, we'll fix healthcare.
So there we go. If we fix the food, we will fix the healthcare. So let me just progress that on.